Okay, Year 7. So we're going to have a look at Municipal Gum by Udguru Nunukul and have a look at the poetic techniques in the poem and, most importantly, how these techniques communicate the ideas that are in the poem. So hopefully this will clarify this poem for you. The first thing we need to understand is that the poem itself is an extended metaphor. In other words, the experience of the indigenous people since European settlement is being compared to the experience of this gum tree that finds itself no longer in the forest, but instead bound in a city street. So the poem itself is an extended metaphor. Another way of thinking about it is this word symbol, that the gum tree is symbolic of the indigenous people. It stands for the indigenous people in this poem. Okay, so let's have a look at the poem itself. It starts, gum tree in the city street, and straight away we have this juxtaposition. If you remember, we spoke about that in class. It is the positioning of two ideas next to each other. So juxtaposition, in this case, we have the gum tree and the city street placed next to each other for effect. And they create that sort of tension in the poem, that here is a gum tree, something that belongs to nature, that finds itself in the middle of a metropolis, a city, municipal gum. Hard bitumen at your feet. Now this, as we've spoken about and you all know, is personification. In other words, a gum tree doesn't really have feet, but the poet is giving it those human attributes of having feet. Why does the poet do this? This is really important that you understand this. Well, the main reason that I see is that the personification creates a sense of empathy with the reader. If the poet gives the tree human qualities, we feel a sort of connection with the tree. All of a sudden it's one of us. And that creates a sense of empathy for the reader. So by saying bitumen around your feet, by giving the gum tree feet, we all of a sudden start to connect and have a strong understanding and a resonance with this gum tree. So it helps us to understand its experience. We feel for the gum tree. The poem goes on. Rather, you should be in the cool world of leafy forest halls and wild bird calls. So once again we get this sense of juxtaposition, that instead of here with this hard bitumen, we get painted the image of a leafy forest hall. This is where the tree actually does belong. And as we know, we've spoken about in class, this leafy forest hall is the metaphor. There is actually no hall to speak of out there in the forest. The poet is actually stating that the leafy forest is a hall. Now the connotation of a hall is this majestic space, this large open cathedral-like space. And so what it does is, by creating this metaphor, once again, now what we're doing is we're starting to connect the technique, metaphor, to the purpose of the poet, is to create a sense of grandeur out there in the forest. This is the noble realm where the tree belongs. It doesn't belong in this hard bitumen, this awful image here. It belongs in this magnificent, majestic place, a place of forest halls. That is the power of that metaphor. We get the rhyme here, halls and calls. I don't think it's a sort of a strong enough technique for you to worry about when we write about this poem, but it's just interesting to note. Here, in other words, here in the city street, you seems to me like that poor cart horse, castrated, broken, a thing wronged, strapped and buckled, its hell prolonged, whose hung head and listless mien express its hopelessness. Okay, so this is an extended simile, if you like. And what we mean by extended is simply that the simile, comparing the gum tree to a cart horse using like, that is our simile, it goes on for a little while, which is why we call it an extended simile. In the exam, you simply need to refer to it as the simile. Like she's comparing the gum tree to a poor cart horse using the word like. Now, you can also talk about the fact that by extension, remember we spoke about the whole symbolic nature of the gum tree. By extension, she's comparing the indigenous people to this cart horse. If she's comparing the gum tree to the cart horse, she's comparing the indigenous experience to the cart horse. Why a cart horse? Once again, it's not enough to simply explain that to identify the poetic technique. You need to be able to talk about why the poet uses this simile. Well, the connotation, once again, of a cart horse, she goes on to explain, is something that is buckled, is no longer this noble creature out in the wild, but is something that has now been put to work, is out of its natural environment in the same way that the gum tree now is, but it is broken. It is doing nothing more than this hard labour. And by comparing the gum tree to this broken animal, by comparing the indigenous people to this broken animal that simply has no joy in its life anymore, but trudges slowly up and down, serving the people of this town, by using that simile, we start to once again get a sense of what the poet feels is the indigenous experience. It really drives that home to the reader. Castrated. This horse has its energy taken from it. It is broken. It has no spirit. It is a thing wronged, which is important. That's quite an important opinion. It is strapped and buckled. It's shackled. It's tied down. It has no freedom. It's hell prolonged. And as we know, it's hell prolonged is the metaphor. The cart horse is not literally in hell. She is comparing here, and you must, gentlemen, you must, when you state what the poetic technique is, you must identify exactly what the metaphor is. So it's not enough to say the metaphor, it's hell prolonged. You must be able to say she's comparing the life of the cart horse to hell. She is actually stating that the life of the cart horse is hell. And the reasons for why she does that are quite obvious. It's to give that effect to the reader of how terrible the cart horse's life is, therefore by extension the gum tree's life is, and therefore by extension the indigenous people of this country, how hard their life is. We then in this next line, well, starting back here actually, we get this little fella, alliteration, the poetic technique where we repeat the consonant sound, in this case the H. It's hell prolonged. Whose, don't forget this is part of the alliteration because it's the sound, not the spelling, it's the sound of the H. Whose hung head and listless mean express its hopelessness. Now, gents, this is important. You need to once again not only identify the alliteration if you're going to talk about this poetic technique, you need to understand why. And in this case, there are probably two things you could talk about. The first is that the simple oral imagery, hell whose hung head, the sound, the repetition of the H sound catches our ear. It draws our attention to that strong image of the hung head, whose hung head. We get this strong image of this poor cart horse whose head can barely lift up. It's heavy, it's pained, it has no life, no hope, no future. So, the alliteration draws our attention to that image. The second reason you could talk about, if you wanted to, was the fact that the H sound is quite a weak sound. It's not a strong consonant sound. It's quite a weak, breathy sound, and we almost get the sense of the horse who is out of breath, whose hung head. It really captures a sense of that tired horse walking up the hill. That's what the H, the repetition of that H sound does. A couple of words I'm hoping that you haven't forgotten or haven't forgotten to go back over your notes where we wrote them down. Mean is simply the way that someone appears, their appearance. Listless, without energy. So whose hung head and appearance without energy, energyless appearance, express its hopelessness. Municipal gum, it is dolorous to see you thus, set in your black grass of bitumen. So we get the sense just there. The black grass of bitumen is obviously the metaphor. Where's my metaphor? Move metaphor. Ignore that simile, gentlemen. There we go. The black grass of bitumen. The bitumen is not actually grass, but we get the effect that this tree should be in green, lovely grass, but instead it is in black grass that is made of bitumen, that hard tar on the road. O fellow citizen, which is likewise our metaphor. The tree is not actually a person, it's not actually a citizen. So she's comparing or stating that the tree is a citizen. You could also talk about it, I guess, being personification, which, as we know, gents, is a metaphor, or personification is a metaphor anyway. But the effect of this metaphor, O fellow citizen, by comparing the tree once again to a fellow citizen, it's someone who is in the same boat as us, someone who lives in the same place as us. It is an attempt to once again create empathy with the reader for this poor gum tree, and hence for the indigenous people. O fellow citizen, what have they done to us? So that, gents, is a quick revision through Municipal Gum. I hope that explains the poetic techniques for you, and I hope as well it connects for you how the poetic techniques convey the meaning of the poem and what it is that the poet themselves wants to say in the poem.